Hi, this is Christian with Forest of Art and Healing Arts. And in this video, I'm going to talk about how to use some techniques from psychotherapy to help boost your immune system and to help avoid conditions in your body and mind that suppress your immune system. The key move is to uncover and work through repressed material. Because, by definition, psychologically repressed material into the unconscious is perceived by the body as a danger, as a threat. And when the body perceives something as a threat, it turns on the sympathetic nervous system, which suppresses the immune system. I'm going to be showing techniques from Rogerian therapy, from psychoanalysis, and from Gestalt therapy. These techniques will be simplified. Normally, it's best to see a psychotherapist, not only because of the expertise of the therapist, but also because part of the therapeutic action comes from the relationship between the client and the therapist. But during times of lockdown and enforced social distancing like we have right now during the COVID-19 crisis, or as we may have in future crises, this may not be possible. Some therapists work online. Not all therapists do work online. Also, psychotherapy can be very expensive. Not everybody has access to that. So these are some techniques that you can do yourself to work to uncover repressed material. First, let's map out our psychological spaces. Humans have a split mind. A small part of it, a very small part of it, is conscious. This is the part that is aware of what's going on at the moment. A larger part is preconscious. This is the part that stores material of which one is not aware of at the moment, but can be called up without any problem. For example, my explanation on this video is being attended to by your conscious mind. You're probably not thinking about what you had for breakfast this morning or where you went to high school. But if I asked you these questions, what did you have for breakfast this morning? You can bring that up from your preconscious, most likely without a problem. A third space is the unconscious. The majority of our psychological material is repressed into this space, and there are layers to the unconscious. At the surface lies automatic behavior. For example, how to act in certain situations. Information about when or around whom to be fearful or happy or sensual. We don't have to think about this, and it might make us somewhat uncomfortable or awkward to think about how this part of our mind is working. But the uppermost layers of the unconscious are usually not too difficult to admit, to think about. Let's take an example of a man who seems to always act a fool around a certain colleague, female colleague at work. A little digging around his unconscious might reveal that he has a crush on her, but he's never allowed himself to admit it because he's married. The desire developed unnoticed by his conscious mind because there is a regulatory part of the self that denies unwelcome desires entry into the conscious mind. This regulatory part is called the ego. Sigmund Freud, who developed this notion, he uses a much simpler term. He calls it das Ich, the I. This is the part of you that regulates your actions so that you remain you in specific social environments or social realities. This is yourself. The ego is also guided by another part, a part of the self that contains a list of moral guidelines and rules. Thou shalt not. This part is called by Freud das Über-Ich, the over-I, or in English, the superego. The superego of the smitten man in our example may contain a strong injunction to allow for no sexual feelings for any woman other than his wife, and yet he desires. His ego carries out the injunction of a superego and blocks this desire from ever coming into his conscious mind. Our lover might never know that he loves. All he knows is that every time he's around his colleague, he tells stupid dad jokes or accidentally knocks her cup of coffee off her desk and generally ends up making a fool out of himself around her. His foolishness and clumsiness are symptoms of the battle between his desire, which is pushing up, and the ego, which says no. However, even though his conscious mind is not aware of the exact issue being contested in his unconscious, the battle is registered by his body. Because the ego is a function of the mind. And all mental functions trigger material reactions in the brain. No psychological function is separate from somatic function and response. When the desire is triggered by his colleague's presence, or even by anything that reminds him of her, the ego pushes down because his desire is a threat to his ego ideal, that of a married, faithful man. The nervous system records the urging of the repressed material from the unconscious and the response of the ego. It records this as a danger because the ego has responded to this material as a danger. And when the body senses danger, it triggers alterations in one's neurotransmitters, switching on noradrenaline in the brain, which is the fight or flight chemical, which innervates the sympathetic nervous system and causes a release of cortisol in the adrenal glands. This is the danger response. This is the stress response. And this response suppresses all functions in the body that are not necessary for fight or flight. Hence, one of the functions it suppresses is the immune function. The body conserves its energy and resources and thereby slows the battle against pathogens. Now, an occasional triggering of danger by the mind, by awkward feelings around a workmate, will not suppress immune function enough to cause a problem. However, if this occurs constantly and over a long period of time, the suppression of the immune system will leave the body vulnerable to the pathogens and the diseases they can cause. Now, unless he's a strict moralist or religious conservative, the man in our example need not freak out too much if he discovers his fancy for his colleague. Once he acknowledges his desire, he can work through it and decide that, even though he is a married man, he can also feel desire for someone else. And though he won't need to act on it, it's okay to feel it. The unconscious desire is now conscious. It has been defunded of its dangerous energetic load, and he can relax and hopefully stop pestering his colleague. When the nervous system reads that the danger is past, the sympathetic nervous system stops responding, and in its place, the parasympathetic nervous system, or the relaxation response, takes over. Chemicals are released that allows him now to relax. In fact, if he's able to work through the issue, he will feel a sense of relief. And this sense of relief is read as a moment of self-growth, which gives a huge boost to the immune system. The example I've started with is a bit trite, and I did that on purpose to explain how repression works and how it triggers the sympathetic nervous system in a simple situation. But let's peer more deeply into the dark ocean of the unconscious. What if instead of a female colleague, it's a male colleague he desires? Let's assume his ego ideal says that he is a heterosexual man. Now the ego must suppress not only infidelitous urges, but also homosexual urges. This may be read as a far greater threat to his constructed self, fragile as it may be. And the symptoms he produces to repress his desire may be more problematic. He may end up feeling a constant sense of anxiety around the male colleague. Or he may even invert and project a desire, accusing his colleague of being gay. our subject could even become a virulent homophobe. Repression can result in many different outcomes of varying severity. But one common feeling is a threat to the self, and this is read somatically as danger and stressful. You can substitute racial misogyny or cross-class desire or any such desire in a repressive society into the example above. What is important to understand here is that psychological repression is read by the body as an indication of danger, which results in immune suppression or malfunction. Now, malfunction is an interesting case, a special case in which emotional repression causes a distortion of immune chemicals called cytokines. These are messenger chemicals in the body, and correct functioning of the immune system requires the cytokines to be in order. Much research has shown that emotional repression causes cytokine imbalance, malfunction, and this can lead to problems such as autoimmune disorders and other problems. Okay, let's move deeper into the heart of darkness. What if instead of wanting to have an affair with a colleague, he wants to kill her? What? Why would he want to kill his colleague? Maybe he's a Buddhist and he drives a hybrid. I mean, this is not who he is. He doesn't see himself that way. He doesn't conduct himself in that way. Now, this is a complex topic and one that is currently being debated in psychoanalytic scholarship, including in my own research. But this video is meant to be practical, so I'm not going to go into theory, and I'm going to stay more with practical examples. At a very basic level, we have all experienced competition for a scarce resource. Whether it be a coveted promotion in the workplace, a desired lover, expensive material objects, or the possession, our mother's love and attention. And inevitably, somebody stood in competition against us for this desired possession. It should be no surprise to admit that we wanted that person gone, away, no more, dead. Freud was one of the first to formulate a theory of a death drive that understood that for children, wanting their rival for their mother's attention gone and wanting him dead were not easily distinguishable. In the dark unconscious, we desire whom we desire, and we want our competitors dead. Freud was also one of the first to tell us that our ego will repress this death drive, and that an erotic symptom will be produced from the ensuing battle. Every conflict in our life has its potential to include wishing one's competitor dead. And this wish is understandably repressed into one's unconscious because it does not fit with one's ego ideal of cooperative, peaceful maturity. And similar to the repression of the sex drive, repression of the death drive will also be read by the body as danger. It can stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, and it can suppress the immune system for as long as its force rages on inside undetected. The suggestion here is not that one go ahead and kill one's competitors or sleep with whomever one wants to, but instead that one go ahead and peer into one's unconscious and see what's there, to acknowledge and work through one's repressed desires. For my last example of repression, I want to switch to a much more pernicious problem of repression. The self also represses abusive and traumatic events, scenes and feelings. Some scenes in infancy and childhood, between the developing self and others in the environment, can be enigmatic or contain an excessive quantity of energy. The infant or child can read these enigmatic scenes with their unbound anxious energy as traumatic and repress them into their newly forming unconscious. These scenes can include enigmatic or abusive adult sexuality, violence, including neglect. However, even though the trauma is repressed, it doesn't go away. We carry it with us our entire life. We carry with us the battle between the enigmatic messages of trauma that keep trying to surge up from the unconscious to be worked through, to be worked out, to be understood, and the ego that represses and pushes them back in. This process of carrying was called by Freud in German Nachträglichkeit. Tragen is to carry. Nach means afterwards. So this is a process of carrying scenes of trauma afterwards. And this process not only works in one direction, it's carried from our past to our present, but when it is triggered by events in the present, it causes us to re-experience and reread the event from the past, the original traumatic scene. This is not a relaxing process. This is very stressful. In fact, and I don't have time to delve too deeply into this in this video, it is this very battle, this very stress, that forms and shapes human subjectivity. So we humans are always feeling some danger down in the bowels of our unconscious. Freud called this our Unbehagen, our uneasiness. The less we are able to peer into our unconscious, the more uneasy and stressed we feel, and the more our immune system is suppressed. The more we discover, acknowledge, and work through our repressed desires and traumatic scenes, the more we can gain a sense of relief from this unease, the more we can chill out, and the better our immune system can work to keep us healthy. Here are 3 techniques for getting into unconscious material and working it through. I want to start with Rogerian Active Listening. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychotherapy, developed a therapy in which the therapist creates a therapeutic space built from 3 conditions: empathy, unconditional positive regard, and congruence. He felt that by holding these 3 conditions, a person could help another person explore, acknowledge, and work through his problems with living, which we are assuming in this video arise partly from unconscious repression. To have empathy is to listen to another person so closely that one can begin to feel what the other person feels as she feels it herself. This is not sympathy. This is not saying, oh, that must have been horrible for you. This is a process of melding, even though you are a different person, but melding with the other person's feelings such that you also are touched and feel actually what the other person is feeling. But what if one is doing this as a self-therapy? Who's the other person? The other person is that person that you've repressed, that you have put away into your unconscious. That's who you're going to listen to. That's who you're going to have empathy with. To do this, sit and listen to your stream of thoughts. Listen to your feelings. Listen for that problematic self to arise. For example, you sit and you listen and you say something like, I need to make sure to finish those spreadsheets and send them over to Jack. He wants me also to send him ideas for the team building exercise. Maybe we can go canoeing. Jack can't swim. Wait, what? Where did that come from? Jack can't swim. Right. It's a little flag in your stream of consciousness that points to a feeling about Jack that doesn't fit the task at hand. It is probably the tip of a repressed feeling about Jack. Here's how to tease it out of the unconscious. As you listen to this part of yourself, hear the content of what it says and listen for the feelings that underlie the content. Listening to your statements about the canoe trip and Jack not being able to swim could reveal that you have some hard feelings towards Jack. Reflect these feelings held by one part of yourself back to yourself. Recognize, reflect, and allow yourself to have these feelings. Then keep talking about your feelings towards Jack. You might notice that included in your feelings about Jack are statements about him drowning and a feeling of such anger at him that you want him dead. In Rogerian Active Listening, we reflect these feelings, no matter what they are, back to the person. In this case, that other part of yourself. Recognize that part of yourself and reintegrate that part of yourself. And here we bring in the second condition, unconditional positive regard. This means that you will not disqualify the other person from empathy, no matter what he says, what he thinks, or who he is. You will keep listening, even if what he says shocks you, even if what he says is about you, even if it's a part of you that's saying to you, I hate you, I wish you were dead, why don't you kill yourself now? Listen to that part of yourself. Recognize that part, acknowledge it, and reintegrate it back into yourself. And if you listen with no judgment, notice that what you've done is you've disabled the censor. You've disabled the ego. So that part, that thought, which was being read by the body as dangerous, is no longer hidden down in the unconscious, wreaking havoc. It's now conscious. You can now think about it, look at it, and work it through. Active listening can be used to listen to any feeling or thought, no matter how mundane or menacing it is. Now let's look at how one can use Psychoanalytic Free Association to uncover repressed material. First, get yourself in a relaxed position. You can be supine, but not asleep, or you can sit on a chair. Some people do this going for a walk. Any way that works for you. Then, allow whatever comes to your mind to come to your mind without censoring. Just let yourself think, whatever you think. You can speak this out loud. Normally you'd be saying it to a therapist, to an analyst. But in this case, it's you doing self-care. So you can say it out loud to yourself. You can write it down. You can do this in a journal. Careful if you're working digitally, if you're writing this into some digital journal, that this cannot be seen, read by anybody else, including anybody from outside who can get into your data. Yeah, because you want to be able to say whatever comes to your mind without censoring. Keep going. Keep saying whatever comes to your mind without censoring. As you do this, the topics, words, images, names, or other aspects of your thoughts will be linked to other topics, words, images, names. This will happen in your mind. This is called an association. When we repress content into our unconscious, the process of repressing leaves a trail. We're going to follow that trail back in by simply allowing ourselves to think whatever comes to our mind. The mind will naturally link itself to the next piece in the trail of association or chain of associations. And eventually, you will end up at repressed content. This is not easy to do. Analysts, therapy patients in analysis, can spend months of therapy avoiding certain associations. The ego does its job well, and it ensures that we don't get to this information. It sets up denials, projections, intellectualizations, and it can even set up other memories to stand in front of the memory you're trying to get to and to screen it. Your task is to sit with this exercise, patiently following the key rule, which is to say whatever comes to your mind without censoring. You can also do this exercise with dreams. Simply start with an aspect of your dream and start talking about it, saying whatever comes to your mind about it without censoring. For example, say that you had a dream that you were on a team building trip with your office and Jack's canoe capsized. Start talking about that and see what comes up without censoring. You don't need to work with the entire dream. Just pick one image or scene or even a word from the dream and let that unfold. Follow that in. Also, you should not try to figure out what it means. Just follow. And for sure, don't pick up a book on dream symbols or look it up on the internet. The associations have to be yours. They have to be specific to your mind. Other people's thoughts about what a canoe capsizing means is not useful. Now for our third technique. Now that you have the information, the images, the words, the scenes, now you can begin to work through. I like to use Gestalt therapy for this task. Gestalt means form in German. Gestalt therapy holds that a part of the whole of the psychological framework around an issue is missing. Where did it go? It has been banned from the stage by the ego. It is a missing character in the total play. It has been repressed. Gestalt works to reintegrate the missing part by discovering the contradiction of opposing sides in the mind and setting up a dialogue between the two sides. One can find the missing part, which opposes what is allowed by the video, using Rogerian Active Listening and Free Association. Then one sets up a dialogue between the repressed part and its opposite. One way to stage the dialogue is to use two chairs. Sit in one chair and speak from the part you have discovered doing the active listening or the free association. This is the repressed desire or the repressed image or feeling or whatever. You want to sleep with your colleague, you want to kill Jack. Speak from that part. Let it say whatever comes to your mind without censoring. Then get up, go over to the other chair and sit in that chair and speak from that part to the first part. Let this part here say whatever it wants to say to the first part. Then get up, go sit in the other part, and let that part speak back. Back and forth, let these two parts speak to each other. What will they say? Whatever comes up without censoring. It's a simple rule. Yep. Now, this is very hard to do. This is not easy. It will take lots of practice, and above all, it will take lots of courage. As you dialogue back and forth, you will notice that something changes. One of the parts could change. Maybe it will intensify its position or deepen into the unconscious. Maybe it will reveal something else that is lurking underneath it. Maybe it will become the voice of someone in your life. Allow the shift to occur and follow it in. So if this becomes the voice of someone else in your life, then you play this person sitting in this chair, speaking back to you. And then see what happens over here. Whatever happens here, then you play that, speaking back to here. Again, whatever comes up without censoring. As you follow this, you will find both sides changing. In fact, you will find yourself changing. This is the working through. Once the repressed and alienated parts are reintegrated, then the mind and the body no longer need to see them as dangerous. One might still need to do more work, for example, confront an abuser, or make structural changes in yourself or in your society. That's beyond the scope of this video. The goal here is simply to increase awareness and to diffuse the sense of danger that repressed material carries.